Hello and welcome back. This is the second episode of Alt-Right 101. Today's topic of discussion is immigration. Few people are aware that the key issue that sways politics today in the United States and Europe isn't things such as gay marriage or abortion or even wars in the Middle East. It's immigration. Everything people tend to complain about regarding their current life directly correlates with immigration in ways they don't even realize. Want more jobs? Blame immigration. Want less inflation? Blame immigration. Want lower taxes? Blame immigration. Want lower crime rates? Blame immigration. Want better schools for your children? Blame immigration. Every single one of these issues that the average person cares about directly correlates to the current policies in the Western world regarding, you guessed it, immigration. I have Mark Collett with me again to share with you why this is the case and why the main issue that alt-right tends to care about and discuss the most is immigration. Thank you for joining me, Mark.
Thank you for having me on again. It's always a pleasure.
Absolutely. Now, I know this is a bit of a beaten drum and people in the alt-right always bring this up, but the main point of immigration that people in the U.S. like to talk about in the alt-right is the Hart-Celler Act of 1965. Prior to 1965, the U.S. was very homogenous. It was mostly all people of Western European origin, but now, every time the alt-right tries to tell people that, they fall back on the lie of a nation of immigrants. And that idea really came from a play written by a British Jew in Britain where they came up with the idea of, oh, it's just a nation of immigrants. Anybody can succeed there. And it kind of gives credence to the idea of the U.S. doesn't have the right to even have borders because of the way it was founded by people who settled here. Do you get anything similar to that in the UK, Mark?
Yes, in the UK, it is very similar to what you're talking about in the US. They often claim we're a nation of immigrants. We're a multicultural nation that has been repeatedly enriched by wave upon wave of immigration. However, this is completely untrue. So I'm going to start today by putting things into a little bit of perspective. In 2016, our current Prime Minister, Theresa May, who was then the Home Secretary, let in 650,000 immigrants legally. She also admits, and this is her admission, that 200,000 immigrants entered Britain in that time frame illegally. Now, if she's saying that, that's a conservative estimate, no pun intended, so it may be many, many more. However, let's work on the basis that it was 200,000. Let's give her the benefit of the doubt. That means in total, in 2016 alone, 850,000 people came into the UK. Now, you might be thinking, well, how are you going to put that into perspective? Well, the last time England was successfully invaded was in 1066 during the Norman Conquest. And between 1066 and 1939, which was the outbreak of the Second World War, there was less immigration into Britain than there was in 2016 alone. So let me just simplify that. In 2016, more people came into Britain than between 1066 and 1939, which just goes to show how we are being swamped. We were not built by wave upon wave of immigration. In fact, mass immigration is only something that has come about very recently, post-Second World War, and it increases exponentially over the decades following the Second World War. And make no mistake, the purpose of mass immigration is to replace the European people. And this is something that has come about not by accident, but by design. The politicians here in the UK, and I'm sure Bree will talk about the situation in America, have designed this. They have literally gone out and looked for immigrants to bring to the UK. Now, you might be saying, surely that's hyperbole. Well, let me read this from a newspaper article. It's in the Daily Mail. The headline is, "Immigrants, we sent out search parties to get them to come." That is a statement from former Labour Minister Peter Mandelson, and he said that Labour deliberately engineered mass immigration, and between 1997 and 2010, he admitted that net migration into Britain totaled over 2.2 million. Now that's his admission. And I'm sure that won't include illegal immigrants or all the ones they're not admitting to. So what you can see here is a mass swamping of a European country by people who are overwhelmingly from places like Africa and the Middle East, who share no common ground with us. And that's an important point, because what you've got to remember is the people that came here between 1066 and 1939 were overwhelmingly, and when I say overwhelmingly, I'm talking 99.9% recurring, people who were our European cousins, people who shared a common ethnic background with us. So when they came here, assimilating and becoming like us was very, very similar. They had a similar culture in the first place, they had similar traditions, they had a common heritage, and they were of the same racial stock. So when they settled in Britain, their offspring, their descendants, over time became very similar or indistinguishable from the indigenous people. And you have to bear that in mind, because the people coming here now, the people that Theresa May let in, the people Lord Mandelson was speaking of, they are not the same as us. They are very different, and as we discussed last week, they have an extremely different culture, a different set of traditions, a different religious background, and are of different racial stock. And the interesting thing when you discuss immigration is, at one point, these politicians, the media, those on the left, they denied that we were being outbred. They denied this would happen. Their newspaper reports started to say by 2060, white Britons will be a minority in Britain. Well, 2060, that seems like a long way away. But London, white Britons are already a minority. They're already less than 50% of the population. And these politicians and the media, they are no longer simply calling this immigration anymore. They are calling it replacement migration. They are being extremely open with what this is all about. And make no mistake, the goal of mass migration is to replace the European. It is to get rid of us. It is to destroy us. Because ultimately, we are the only people who will ever have what it takes to stand up to the insidious globalist internationalists who wish to rule over us.
That is true, because we see that just with the demographic voting patterns here in the U.S. If you look at blacks, they vote 90-10 for the left. Asians, I think it's 65 for the left. Hispanics, 70 for the left, something to that effect. And these people from these other countries, they don't value small government. Small government is something that was created by white Western Europeans here in the U.S., modeling it after a little bit of British common law and modeling a little bit after the French and a lot of various philosophical ideas. But the idea of small government and having independence and freedom, those are things that are originally European. So naturally, if they wanted to create a socialist state in Europe or in the U.S., well, naturally, white people vote right. White people vote for smaller government, and you can't expand the government as easily with a right-winger in office. Now, that has changed recently, of course, because conservatives have pretty much sold us out to the left. Modern-day conservatives are the liberals of the 90s. But if we look at the statistics as far as immigration in the U.S., I believe it was a 2014 census record that claimed 11 million immigrants have come to the U.S. just over the course of the last couple of decades. 11 million. And to me, when I hear that number, I can't imagine just 800,000 coming into the UK. You're a tiny island. But same with here in the US. That doesn't sound like immigration to me. That's an invasion. And I first started noticing this in the early 2000s. It really got going like really hardcore in the 90s. Generation X doesn't have, they tend to have memories of white neighborhoods. And I remember a little bit of that when I was a little kid. We had one or two Latinos walking around. But that happened just in the early 2000s that I started going to the mall and noticing that every single person working behind the counters used to be a white teenager looking to make a good wage to get a little experience of work while they were in high school. Now it's all middle-aged men in turbans or Latinos who are willing to work for less money because, well, they don't have as high a quality of life as we do. They don't expect that lifestyle. And then they send that money back to Mexico, and that helps to stir the Mexican economy. So of course the president of Mexico is going to tell people to come over the border and flood us over. He's benefiting from it. The entire Mexican economy is benefiting from it.
Now, I'm very pleased you brought up the point of both big government and the idea of who is working. Now, here in Britain, we have a huge problem, as we've discussed before on several different shows, of Muslim immigration. And make no mistake, it is the British government's, big government, their system of welfare benefits that is attracting these people into Britain. It is our welfare system that is handing everything on a plate to these immigrants. It's the welfare system that is giving them a house. It's the welfare system that's giving them cash every week, that's giving them interpreters, that's putting the food on their table, that's giving them the National Health Service. And when you look at who's actually working, this may shock viewers, but 80% of adult Muslims are not in work. So that means only 1 in 5 adult Muslims living in the UK are actually working. The rest will be claiming some form of benefit. And whilst they are sitting at home on benefits, they are essentially being paid to produce children, and they are breeding at an alarming rate. And I actually did a video which I suggest if people want to know more about the UK benefit system, they look up at that video. It's called How the British Welfare System Favours Muslims. Now, this is how you can see that the government has designed a welfare system that has been engineered to attract these people into Britain. We have a welfare system that consistently favours immigrants, especially Muslims. Now, I'll just give you a small example of this. If someone who is of British origin walks out of work, they cannot immediately claim benefits because they have voluntarily left work. Now, if you're sacked or if you're made redundant, things are different. However, under new government guidelines, if a Muslim male or a Muslim female objects to working with a member of the opposite sex, they can walk out of work on religious grounds and are immediately entitled to full state benefits due to their religion. So if a Muslim male says, oh, I can't sit next to that girl who doesn't have a full face veil on, sorry, that's against my religious convictions, they're entitled to full benefits. And there is also an issue with housing. Now, in Britain, social housing is given out on a scale which is meant to reflect need. Well, need is defined by the size of the family. So the larger the family and the higher the number of children, the higher up the ladder the family will go. The closer to the front of the queue, the family will go. So if you have a family with 8 or 9 children, the local authority will house those people first. So these Muslims with huge families, they are being given housing ahead of the indigenous people due to the size of their families. And this is consistently giving these people not only a huge advantage when they get here, but is giving them a huge incentive to come here. Now, I spoke briefly earlier about people from Europe who came here between 1066 and 1939 that had a common ancestry and a very similar cultural background to us. Well, these Muslims don't have that. And when they come here, they are not integrating, they are not living by our way of life, and you can see their only wish to come here is financial. This isn't being driven because they have a common ancestry, because they have common cultures, because they like the British way of life. Immigration is being driven by money. These people are economic migrants, and they are coming here in huge numbers. They are taking advantage of our welfare system, and they are using that welfare system to allow themselves to breed at an alarming rate, and then they are completely transforming the racial and cultural makeup of entire cities in the UK.
And I've actually heard the Turkish president encourage people to go over to Europe and have as many children as they want, because that's how the religion works. They want to conquer, they want to breed as much as possible, because they understand demographics. And we have the exact same problem here with illegal immigrants. I believe it was Ann Coulter in her book Adios America. She estimated that there were 30 million illegal Mexican immigrants, or just Latino immigrants in general, coming into the U.S., and up to 70% of them are on welfare. Now, I used to think that when that was discovered, we were good little Americans and we'd kick them out of the country, but that doesn't happen. They pretty much get a slap on the wrist, and the police aren't allowed to arrest them and aren't allowed to deport them. And former President Barack Obama actually counted people who came to the border and were rejected and weren't allowed inside the country as deportations. He counted that as deportations to up the quota to make it look as though we were getting rid of illegal immigrants, when in reality our police weren't even able to do so. And the main lie that pisses me off about this is that we're always told that these immigrants and illegal immigrants, they're such hard workers and they've contributed so much. When I hear that, all I think is, by contributing, they took someone else's job. And this is something that conservatives are guilty of in politics as well, that they've profited from as well. We call them such hard workers because Juanita will come to our house and make our beds and clean our floors. Those are jobs we used to do. Those are jobs that we used to take care of.
Well, I'm really pleased you mentioned deportations, because we have another problem in the UK, and it's our government constantly telling us that they're going to clamp down on illegal immigration. In fact, Theresa May, I spoke of her earlier, she was going to come down hard on immigrants, yet she holds the record for letting in the largest number of immigrants in any year, 850,000. And let's put that into a bit more perspective. 850,000 is more people than live in the city of Manchester. In fact, the city of Manchester has a population of about 500,000, so it's significantly more. It's pushing a city that's, 180%, roughly about 180%, 175% the size of the city of Manchester. Now that is absolutely overwhelming. But the government always has a response to this, and it is never deportation. They always talk of deportation. They talk of sending vans around that say go home, vans that say you must report if you are here illegally. We will be sending people back. Illegal immigration is a crime, and they're constantly talking about that. However, their response ultimately is always the same. It is always an amnesty. And now they are discussing an amnesty across the whole of the City of London, which will eventually be rolled out to the whole of the UK. Now, the problem with this is every time somebody comes here illegally, they know it is only a matter of time until there is an amnesty, and then another amnesty, and then another amnesty. So essentially, illegal immigration is actually legal immigration if you manage to stay here until the next amnesty. And this basically grants what are criminals, people who have broken the law, the right to stay indefinitely in the UK. So that means that we don't have an immigration system. We just have an open door policy. Because whether you are let here legally or illegally, you always end up staying. And as you so rightly said in the introduction, this affects every facet of life. Now, let's take away the racial aspect. Let's just put that to one side for a small amount of time. Now, obviously, you and I spend a huge amount of time talking about the destruction of people of European descent. I spend a huge amount of time talking about the destruction of the indigenous people of Great Britain. But let's put that just in a little box for a while. And let's talk about all the other ways immigration affects people in Britain. You see, now, getting to work in the morning takes a huge amount of time. All of our cities are gridlocked. And if you live in London, getting on the tube or travelling is virtually impossible.
I once had to wait 5 tubes just to get on one.
Well, that's exactly what people have to put up with. And that's bad enough if you're a tourist or you're just living here temporarily. But if you're living here every day, it's hell. And I can tell you, even where I live, it's a nightmare travelling into the city centre in rush hour. And that is something that has been exponentially worsened by immigration. That is something that has been made a huge amount worse because of the number of people coming here. But it's not just traffic, it's not just congestion, it's the destruction of our countryside. Look how many forests, look how much of our woodland, look at how many of our fields, our green spaces are being destroyed every year. Increasingly, British local authorities are applying for planning permission to destroy our green belt, which is meant to be protected land. They are destroying what is possibly our greatest natural heritage. Our environment, the beautiful English countryside, is being chewed up every day, every week, every month to make new houses to house these immigrants, because we have a rapidly growing population and we are running out of space. It affects us when it comes to school spaces. They cannot build schools quick enough. We have class sizes going over 30 children in a class. How can a child possibly get the attention they need from a teacher when there's so many people in a class? And what's more, how can a teacher... I was going to say, how can a teacher give anyone the attention they deserve when everyone's speaking a different language? And this is a problem. There's a local school near where I live, and I remember the local paper running a gushing article of how proud they were that in this school there was over 30 different languages being spoken in the playground. Well, that's not a cohesive community. That can't possibly work. That's just going to be gangs of different children speaking their own language and the teacher not even being able to cope. And that's why schools are going down the pan in Britain, because immigration is destroying the school system, and it affects every facet of our lives, whether it's NHS waiting lists, whether it's a waiting list for your GP, whether it's house prices, local authority housing availability. Immigration is destroying our country in every way imaginable, and it is making life worse for everyone. And the fact of the matter is, all of the problems it brings with it, because I'll tell you something else, the prisons can't cope either. Let's not just talk about schools, let's not just talk about hospitals. The prisons can't cope, because the prisons are overflowing because of the immigrant population. This is a huge problem. So what are we going to do? Well, the government's not going to do anything. The government's going to have another amnesty, then it's going to let even more people in, then it'll let us have another amnesty, until eventually we literally just have a system where people are pouring in from the third world and the Middle East and colonizing us to the point where we are being displaced in our own homeland. And the real problem here, or the real insult, should I say, to us as indigenous people, is we're the ones funding it. We are the ones paying for this, because overwhelmingly, these people aren't making a positive contribution to our society. They are costing us huge amounts of money, and it is overwhelmingly the indigenous people who are paying for their own destruction.
You brought up gangs, and I know it was in reference to children, but one thing I did want to bring up was the coyote gangs that we have here, just along the border, because our border patrol guys, they can't handle it. They can't handle the stress because people are, as you said, being encouraged to come across the border because, well, we give amnesty and a slap on the wrist. They can get welfare so easily. Sounds like a great deal to someone who is from an impoverished area, can get a lot more money and send some back home to their families. And this causes all kinds of crime at our borders, such as people bringing over weapons, people bringing over drugs, various drug cartels and their dealings and all the violence they bring. And something the coyote gangs got involved with was trafficking of humans and sex trafficking. I think I read a statistic somewhere that said 9 out of 10 women who cross the border illegally are in fact raped or sold into sex slavery through these coyote gangs. And they buy off the farmers that are in southern Texas. They will sometimes offer them money or hush money or threaten their whole families, saying if you report all that you're seeing with us coming across this border and get involved or interfere with our dealings, we'll kill you and our family. So what we're going to do is we're going to leave a bag of money over in this location. Take it or leave it, we don't care, but if you speak, you're dead. And that's another thing that people don't realize as far as what comes with these immigrants. They might be good people, but in the third world, unfortunately, they don't have a lot of modern medicine. We've had cases of cholera turning up in the U.S., which is a disease you see in countries like Haiti that are completely impoverished. They bring over diseases and they're not vaccinated. I wasn't even allowed to go to kindergarten or preschool until I could prove that I was vaccinated. Well, these people coming from third world countries are not vaccinated, and they are always given preference. I knew a young woman who lived up in upstate New York, and she actually moved away from New York because the government was giving so much welfare preference to refugees coming in. And I do this because they're not really refugees, but they'll call them that because it sounds nicer. And she wasn't able to get the help she needed for her family when they were going through some tough financial times, and they unfortunately wanted to get on welfare, get some food stamps because of all the layoffs and the economy's been bad. They couldn't do it. They didn't give preference to the Americans who were born here. They gave automatic preference to a bunch of Islamic refugees coming in and flooding over the town. So immigration has ripple effects that you can't even imagine.
Well, I'm really pleased you talk about the financial incentives again, because we have a unique problem with these, as you call them, so-called refugees. Because when they come here, you might have noticed, I'm sure everyone has noticed, that they come here in huge numbers. But when they come here, they're overwhelmingly men of fighting age. Mm-hmm. Now, what they tend to do here is they get themselves established. So they will come here, they will claim asylum, they will seek refugee status. And once they're housed and once they're allowed to stay here, they then return to their country of origin or to another Islamic nation, and they have an arranged marriage. And once they have married their bride, they bring her back to the UK. And this, again, speeds immigration into the country. And you can see this is their plan to colonize the UK. The males come here first, they set up the base, they go home, they have their arranged marriage, and then they bring their wife, or they've got a wife back home who then they bring along with their children, and the man sets up the base, then he goes home, he collects his woman, or he collects his woman and his children, and then they come here too. And that is how they grow so rapidly and take over areas so quickly, along with, of course, the fact that they breed much more rapidly than we do.
They don't use birth control.
No, and you also mentioned the health service. Now that's a really important thing in the UK. That's a really important aspect of immigration as well. Now the NHS, the National Health Service, it's not something that you have. We have a state-run health service. We don't need health insurance. Everyone in the UK is entitled to walk into any hospital and get immediate care. We don't have to pay for it. But that brings with it huge amounts of problems because we get people called health tourists. You see, the whole world knows that we have the NHS. They know we have a national health service. They know we have free 100% health coverage for everyone. So all they have to do is get into the UK and then it's free healthcare time. They can walk into any hospital and get healthcare. You have people from Africa coming here for AIDS treatment. You have people coming here for cosmetic surgery. You actually have people coming from all over the world and claiming that they need cosmetic procedures on our NHS because we have this insane open door immigration policy, an open door health system, and this is literally bleeding our economy dry. It's bleeding the public purse dry. And the problem with this is it's also affecting the way of life of the indigenous people. Because people who have paid in all their lives, people who should be entitled to these services, are now missing out on these services because of immigrants. So your grandma, your mum, your dad, somebody in your family, they might need an operation, they might need a hip replacement, they've paid in all their life. But that keeps being endlessly deferred. Their operation keeps being put off because the health service is so overburdened dealing with this swamping mass of immigrants who have come here to use the health service that the health service can't even treat those who funded it and those who have been paying tax contributions their whole life, who are rightfully the heirs to that health service and deserve to be given first preference. But again, they are not being given preference on the NHS. Then you hear these horror stories that there aren't enough beds. And you literally have pensioners lying on hospital beds in corridors because there aren't the rooms available to give them their own rooms because the NHS is overburdened. You see, when these people come in, we're always told they grow the economy. Well, we've already busted that myth because, as I've said earlier, 80% of Muslim immigrants, or Muslims, just Muslims in the UK, are on benefits. So they're not growing the economy. In fact, they are a drain on our economy. They're a drain on our services, and they make life worse for everyone. Britain is a tiny island, and it is now overcrowded to an insane level. We are now reaching a point where cities like London, where the indigenous people are now a minority, you cannot get on the tube, you cannot get where you're going in the morning unless you set off at a ridiculously early time, you can't get an appointment at the local GPs, you can't get hospital treatment which you need, which often would transform your life for the better, so you are put at a huge disadvantage. And on top of that, your children aren't being properly schooled. And this is all thanks to mass immigration. And when the government say mass immigration has transformed Britain, they're right, but it's transformed it for the worse. It has been a net negative on everyone's life, and it has cost us billions, possibly trillions.
An area that it really costs us money here in the United States is, as you mentioned, prisons. Unfortunately, our prisons are dominated a lot by the immigrants who, again, aren't always deported. And one of the reasons why is that they bring over crimes that we're not used to seeing here. We're not used to seeing acid attacks. We're not used to seeing mass gang rape. We're not used to seeing female genital mutilation. And then naturally people always come forward saying, well, that's just an expression of their religion. It's a free country. It's freedom of religion. They can do what they want. And it's just a matter of time before they try to make things that are not normal for the West, things such as polygamy or female genital mutilation, are normalized for religious reasons. And another thing I like to remind people of, now I've traveled to the Middle East, and I can say, beyond a shadow of a doubt, they do not reciprocate all the values that you give to them. I've had other friends who have traveled to India and say the same thing. I had a friend who couldn't wait to get out of India. She said she'd never been groped so many times in her life. When I was in Turkey, And I say this without knowing much about the conflict between the Kurds and the Turks. I'm ignorant of it. But I heard a Turkish man say the only good Kurd is a dead Kurd. The Chinese, you think white people are bad against people of color. The Chinese are openly racist against blacks. They don't like them at all. They even have a word to describe them that it translates to something that has the word monkey in it. So these people don't share our values. They don't reciprocate the values that we give to them or that we try to share with them and we try to show ourselves as having. And you think we're racist. These people, a lot of the times, they're openly racist. They openly disrespect women. And we're always making excuses for them.
That's very true, and I'm pleased you brought up the polygamous marriage. You see, that's another way that the Islamic immigrants transform the UK. They have more than one wife. Now, interestingly, in the UK, we do not recognize that aspect of Muslim life. The government refuses to recognize Islamic marriage, which you might think is a good thing. You might think, oh, the government not recognizing Islamic marriage, that's good, that's sticking to British values. Well, actually, it's not that good. You see, because the government doesn't recognize Islamic marriage as binding, they recognize those women as single mothers, as non-married mothers. And if you're a single mother in Britain with a large number of children, as we mentioned earlier, you're top of the housing list. This is, again, a way that Muslim immigrants in the UK play the system. They have multiple wives that they're married to under Islamic law, and then those women who are seen by the government and the establishment as single mothers can then apply for housing, and these Muslim men are then in a situation where they are running between several different properties, and they can use those properties, they can rent those properties out, they essentially control them. And in the UK, if you live in local authority housing for long enough, you get to buy that house at a reduced rate from the local authority after you've lived there for a certain period of time. Now, obviously, if a Muslim man is married under Islamic law to 2 or 3 different women, and 2 of those women aren't living with him but are living in a separate house, and that house is being lived in for so many years, however many years it is, and those women then choose to buy that house, they can buy it at a discounted rate. And this is allowing Muslims to buy up huge amounts of property. It's allowing them to take over entire streets, entire areas, and it is literally aiding the colonization of the UK. And again, it's another instance of how UK law actually favors immigrants, but not only favors immigrants, but it is something that invites them to come here. It's something that entices them to come here, because when they come here, not only do they know they're going to get benefits, not only do they know they're going to be housed first, but it is a way that they can get on the property ladder, buy up property, and it is a way that allows them to colonize entire cities in a very short amount of time. And if you go to certain cities in the UK, like Bradford, you can see the effect of that, where you go to areas where there isn't a single white face, where every shop is owned by a Muslim, where there are no longer any active churches, where there is a mosque everywhere you look. And you can see that we haven't just been colonized, but we have been transformed, and we have allowed an alien culture to aggressively settle within our own lands, and we have paid for the privilege of that.
One of the issues I always hear people discuss is this issue of magic dirt. There's this idea that when immigrants come across our borders, they pass the magic dirt, and all of a sudden they become good Americans who love their guns, and they love the Constitution, and they want small government. And don't worry, we can eventually get them to vote this way. And you just don't see that with the results of what you were looking at the voting patterns, because most immigrants that I see coming here don't vote for the right. They don't vote for more guns. They will use them in their gang violence, but they don't want you to have them. Most people I've met who are very anti-gun are either white liberals or they're immigrants coming in because they're used to not having those sort of things.
No, I agree. I mean, I'll take this back to what actually entices these people to come here. What is the driving force for these people to come here? And we've said repeatedly today that the driving force is actually economics. They are coming here because they get a better way of life, which is funded by the indigenous people, by the taxpayers. Now, when they come here and they're getting everything handed on a plate, and they're coming here because they get everything handed to them on a plate, they are not then going to vote for smaller government and for them not to be handed everything on a plate. In fact, they are going to vote for parties that want to give them more. And because they retain their high level of cohesion, they are a cohesive community, they vote as a bloc, which gives them a huge amount of power. And it does allow them to influence local politics on a sweeping scale. And you see that in the UK, where a group of Muslims who might only be 25% of the population, let's say a group of Muslims come to a small town in the UK and they comprise 25% of the population. Well, what people will say, especially conservatives, especially people who would call us fearmongers, they would say, oh, well, we're still 75% of the population. What are you worried about?
Yeah.
You can vote, we will outvote them. Well, that's not how it works. You see, we are atomized and we are also apathetic. So usually in local authority elections in the UK, a high turnout would be 50%. So let's say we get a 50% turnout. Well, when you get a 50% turnout and the Muslims are 25% of the population, if 100% of the Muslims just voted, that's 50% of the voters. And if they all vote for one party, whatever party they vote for automatically wins that election.
And that's how you got a Muslim mayor, right?
See. Exactly. That is how a cohesive community, a cohesive minority community who are highly motivated, who stand together and who get behind their community leaders and act as a group, can actually beat an atomized and apathetic majority. And that is what they've done all over Britain. And they vote for parties, they consistently vote for parties who will give them more. They vote for parties who will open the doors and let more people like that in. They vote for parties who will give them more grants. They vote for parties who will put them to the top of the housing list. They vote for parties that will give them more benefits. And they vote for parties who will increasingly change the law to benefit them and to put their way of life first. So when I talk about things like I did earlier, like the changes in the benefits system, which overwhelmingly benefit Muslims, which allow Muslims to have, it makes them more equal. They're not looking for equality, they're looking to be more equal. It puts them on a better standing than the indigenous people are on. It allows them to walk out of any job for religious reasons and claim full benefits immediately. And the indigenous people couldn't do that. So they're going to vote for a party that does that for them. And then the other parties who see that the Muslim vote is powerful, they too start to pander to the Muslims. They too start to think, well, we better get our act together. We better start pandering to these people because they're the ones who are now holding the keys to power. These are the people that are making the electoral system work. They're the ones not making the electoral system work. These are the people who have perverted the electoral system. They're the ones running the electoral system. They're the ones who are basically saying who is going to be the next government in the UK. So then you get every party falling over themselves to pander to the immigrant voters. And believe me, if anyone is foolish enough to think that any of the mainstream parties will turn around and say, well, actually, if that party is pandering to the Muslims, how about we pander to the indigenous people? How about we put them first? That's never going to happen because none of the mainstream parties want to do that. All of the mainstream parties are fundamentally controlled by the insidious internationalist clique. They are all controlled by people who want mass immigration. And they see that mass immigration is achieving their ends and goals, and they will continue pandering to these immigrants because these immigrants will grant them more power. And that is coincidentally exactly why they want us gone, because we are the only ones that are a threat to the internationalists.
It's interesting you should say that, because I've heard them on countless occasions butter up immigrants. And if you don't like all this mass migration coming in, either you're paranoid and it's not really happening, or you're racist. What do you have against that mother who just wants to bring her child across the border and find a better life? Who are you to tell her that she can't? And so what if she gets on welfare right away? She'll eventually get a job and become a good American, become a good citizen, and you're denying her that opportunity when your ancestors did exactly that, as though we don't have, once again, the right to have a border. And that's how they manipulate our emotions, because immigration, for many people, is an emotional issue. They don't look at the crime stats like you and I do. They don't look at the economics. They don't look at the benefit system. They see a poor woman coming across the border who has a terrible life and desperately needs help. And who are we? Like, what kind of Christian are you if you don't help somebody? That kind of attitude. And they use that as a weapon against us. So we'll be okay with people who have nothing and contribute nothing and are actually a drain on the economy coming in. That's how they manipulate us. People talk about it being an emotional issue for them, and it is emotional because they try to feed off our altruism of wanting to help other people.
Well, I'm really pleased you raised that point, because integration is something that's very important. I've talked of different ways the government have manipulated the people of Britain. I've talked about the way they initially said there was going to be, an economic benefit to these people coming here, how initially they said, we were paranoid cranks and we were not being replaced, and now they're saying we are being replaced. But one other major lie the government always tells people in Europe, and especially people in Britain, is the lie of integration. They tell us that over generations they'll become just like us, that in 2 or 3 generations' time the children or the grandchildren of these immigrants will be just as British as roast beef and Yorkshire pudding. Just give them time, give them time. Well, I can blow that myth to pieces simply by stating that when you look at those committing these terrorist acts, a huge number of them aren't first-generation immigrants, but they're second-generation immigrants or third-generation immigrants, people who were born here in the UK and were born with a British passport. Now, when you look at the Manchester bomber, the monster that targeted young girls at an Ariana Grande concert, he was the son of Libyan immigrants. These people had been granted safety in the UK. We had clothed them, we had housed them, we had fed them, and their offspring repaid our kindness by murdering our little girls. Integration is a lie. The more immigrants that you have in your country, the less likely they are to integrate. When 1 or 2 people come over and live in a European city, they have to be like us. They have to learn the language. They have to fit in. They have to shop at our stores. They have to respect our way of life. They have to mix with us. And they have to essentially fit in. When there are hundreds of thousands of these people in a single European city, there's enough of them that they can cluster together in their own areas, speak their own languages, go to their own schools, go to their own mosques and temples, shop at their own shops, and there is a community inside a community. Mass immigration and the growth of an immigrant community does not lead to integration. It leads to a separate society forming inside our nations. And they run their own economies, and they even run their own legal systems. They have Sharia courts operating in the UK. It is a completely parallel life. And these people, they resent us, they dislike the Western way of life, and eventually their children grow up with such chips on their shoulders They commit horrific acts, they commit acts of terrorism, and they spread barbarity like female genital mutilation, acid attacks, and other horrors. And that is the legacy we will leave our children if we do not stop mass immigration and if we do not begin to reverse mass immigration. Because in my opinion, these people who do not fit in with us, these people who do not want to live by our ways of life and aren't compatible with our ways of life, they should go and live somewhere else. They should go and live in nations that are compatible with their ways of life. There are plenty of Muslim nations on the planet, and if people want to live under Islamic law, they should go and live in an Islamic nation. Europe is not the place for Islam.
Exactly the same here. America is no place for us just to build another Mexico. One of the jokes I told my family when we lived deeper in the South was, we don't need to go to Mexico, we're already there. We went to a local zoo and it was occupied mostly by Mexicans, and we went, I'm at the zoo, sorry, I mean Mexico City. And you brought up more of their crimes. That's something we see so much here, but people don't know about it because our media deliberately hides from us just how much crime these immigrants are committing. When you look at a newspaper or you read an article online, this is a trend. This has actually been documented. Whenever it's an immigrant or a black person or a Mexican, an immigrant from anywhere in the world, they will always say, man rapes girl, man robs bank, man does this. They love it when it's a white person who does it. They will openly call someone white when it is a white person doing the attacking. But whenever it's a person of color or an immigrant, it's always man commits a crime. And they hold them to standards of foreign law and not our law. When someone, a Latin immigrant, commits a rape, this happened recently, I believe, in Texas, they are often held to a different standard because, oh, well, they don't speak our language, therefore they don't understand the charges that are given to them by the lawyer, and their attorney can't communicate well with them, and they're not used to our laws, so let's try them according to Mexican law. And this is something that happens a lot more often than you think.
Well, that's exactly the same here in the UK. And one thing that you can see, which is really, really starting to affect the UK, is the spread of things like female genital mutilation, acid attacks, and other crimes which are really tied to the spread of Islam. And these crimes, especially female genital mutilation, if you look at the figures, and they are shocking figures, the spread of this, it's spreading like wildfire, yet the police are refusing to tackle it. The police are refusing to do anything about it because it is a culturally sensitive issue. And we now have a police force that refuses to deal with ethnic crime. So you have situations like Rotherham in the UK, where over 1,400 white girls were systematically groomed, sexually assaulted, raped, and abused by Muslim men, and the police force covered it up because it was a racially and culturally sensitive crime, and these people didn't want to rock the boat. And it wasn't just the police who were complicit in those crimes. It was also the political establishment. Because as I explained earlier and illustrated with a small analogy, I said if there was 25% Muslim population in an area, if they all went out to vote, they would be able to take power. Well, in places like Rotherham, that is exactly what has happened. So the local political establishment would do nothing about the wave of rapes and sexual assaults on young white girls because they did not want to offend the Muslim community, because they relied on that Muslim community to keep the political status quo and re-elect the sitting councillors in that area. So white politicians, white liberal politicians, and white police officers turned a blind eye to one of the most horrific crimes in British history, possibly the largest case of sex crimes in British history, simply because they refused to offend the immigrant population. And that, in a nutshell, is how a small, cohesive group of immigrants can totally pervert a justice system, completely change the way of life, and get away with mass criminality in the West because no one will deal with them. Because in a very short space of time, these people have begun to wield a hugely disproportionate amount of power and essentially pervert the entire democratic process and ensure that the entire political establishment is pandering to their needs to the point where the indigenous population have not only become second-class citizens, but have in fact become the victims of a massive child sex scandal.
I think we've left everybody with a lot to think about, and it certainly is a huge topic to take in. We could probably do multiple parts of this particular topic, but I think we've given a good summarization. Let my viewers know where they can find your work.
People can find me on YouTube. Just search my name, Mark Collett. I'm sure it'll be in the description. And you can also read my book. It's called The Fall of Western Man. You can find that at www.thefallofwesternman.com. And it's available as a free ebook as well as in both hardback and paperback. And you can also follow me on social networks, Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. Thank you.
And I'm Bri Fauché. You can find all my material, including this podcast, in audio version and video version at brifauché.com. Take care, everyone. Until next week. Bye.